Hi, welcome back to my channel. It's been a little while and I know I say that a lot, and I have tried to figure out how to start this video. It's one of those things where you get out of practice of something, it's really hard to then go and sit down and just do it, but I thought I'm just going to turn on the camera and do it. So it is the end of the year as I record this. We're a couple of days away from Christmas. I'm not sure when I'm editing it, so it'll probably go out after Christmas. I don't know. But yeah, so we have 2 weeks-ish until the end of the year, and I don't know about you, but around this time of the year I start thinking about next year and what I'm going to do. December becomes kind of like a wind down month for me, and I get really excited about the new year and what I could do next year and the possibilities that are ahead of me. And it almost feels like, not that 2024 was a disaster, I had a, you know, it was a good 2024. There were lots of things I achieved and lots of things that I wanted to achieve but just didn't for whatever reason, and that's fine. But I always find that the new year feels, no matter what happened in the year before, like a blank slate. It's almost like you can just take a breath and start again, and there's a whole fresh new year, fresh page ahead of you to just, right, let's go again. These are the things that I got done last year, and these are the things that I didn't get done and I still want to do them. And I know many people on their goals, New Year's resolutions, whatever you want to call them, will have on their list to write their book or finish their book, or even actually just write a book. And this could be their very first book, or it could be someone who's written and for whatever reason has come away from writing and wants to get back into writing a book. You know, lots of people have write a book on their goal for the new year. So that is what this video is. I want to talk about is if you're wanting to write a book in 2025, whether it is your first book or your 100th book, I just want to give you some tips on how to actually do that, because the last few years have felt like a real struggle, not just for people who've never written a book before, but just, you know, I mean, for everybody obviously, but in a creativity way, it's felt like a struggle for me. I have definitely not been producing the amount of books and words that I normally produce, and I have 2 pen names. You know, I've got over 50 books published, and people think that I must be super fast, and it's like, I feel like a fraud when I say yes, because yes, I used to be, but then the whole COVID thing happened and life just got crazy and I've just got out of sync. But I have a lot of experience in writing a book, so that's why I want to talk to you about writing a book. And I'm sorry if it's a bit rambly, I am so out of practice. So writing a book, actually, and the idea of writing a book is super exciting, and it's one of those things that you think is really easy until you sit down to do it, and it still is easy, but it's also hard, and I know that doesn't make a lot of sense unless you've actually tried to do it. It's like running a marathon. Running a marathon itself is easy. It's easy to run, one leg in front of the other, but actually doing it is hard. And it is the same with a book. You've got to keep the momentum going, you've got to keep yourself going. So when I say writing a book is hard, that's what I mean when I'm talking about it. And I can remember writing my first proper book. I'm not talking about first book, because I wrote my first actual book when I was a child, but my first proper serious book I wrote in the beginning of the 2000s, and I just discovered I was writing and I was back and forthing and didn't really understand it. There was no social media back then, but I discovered NaNoWriMo and the whole world of writers and actually wrote my first book, and it was a most amazing thing. And so it's coming with a lot of experience that I want to talk to you about writing a book. So one of the first things I'm going to say to you is, if you want to write a book in 2025, you need to actually set some realistic goals for yourself, what you can achieve, what you know is possible around your life. And you know, for me, I am a full-time writer and I've taken on some freelance work. I've spoken about this in videos before, and so I have to be realistic about my time and what I can achieve. And writing a book, like, I would love to write a book a month, and I did do that for 1 year, and it was a lot of fun, but it was also super hard, because you kind of like getting this burnout because there's no break time. So if your plan is to write a book, be realistic with yourself. You know, set a word count goal that works for you, for your schedule, for your life. When I wrote my first book, I was working a full-time job. I had 4 children at home. I had to commute to and from work and picking the children up from school and childminders and all that stuff. Life was a little bit chaotic, but I got the words done around all that. I used to put the kids to bed about 8 o'clock. 8:30, 9 o'clock I'd be down writing a good hour of words. I can write really fast. I'm quite fortunate on that, but I had to set it around my schedule. And so if you have the goal of writing a book, just be realistic with what you can do. The other one about being realistic is breaking your writing down into stages. So it really depends on how you write. Now, I am predominantly a pantser with a little bit of planning in the middle. So I will have an idea in my head and I will sit down and I will blast out chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, as far as I can get before my brain's like, I don't know what's happening, and then I'll kind of plot a little and my writing system becomes in step. It depends on what your system is, and if you've never written a book before, you might not know what your system is, and so you have to experiment. Does pantsing just work for you, you know, where you sit down and you just write whatever comes to your head, or are you someone who needs an in-depth plot? So you've got to allow time for that. Do you like time to brainstorm? Do you need to go to have chats with people? How do you work to write a book? And if you don't know how to brainstorm your story, I have a video series on that, but experiment with lots of things, do different things and see what works for you for getting the words down on the page. One of my best things for sticking to my goals, because this is part of goal setting, is to set a realistic goal but also stick to it, is using tools to help you stick to your goals. So back in the day I used something called Write or Die, and it was basically a sprinting system where you wrote words, and if you paused for a certain length of time, an alarm would go off. You could actually set it to kamikaze mode, which I did do when I got a little bit more advanced. Was if you pause too long with writing, it actually starts eating your words. This actually taught me to write fast, but there are other tools you can use. Notion, Scrivener. I actually use something called For the Words now. It's probably one of my favorite things. This past year I've actually struggled with my writing just to get into it. My house is so busy. I've got this YouTube channel that, you know, I might be a full-time writer, but I'm also a full-time business owner for my writing business, so there are so many things going on. Conferences, I've got to do my marketing, I've got to do adverts, you name it. It isn't just writing books when you go full-time, it's the whole thing that goes with it. And so it can be very easy not to write, and I really struggled with that. And then earlier this year I have discovered, or it was recommended to me, a website called For the Words, which has been amazing, and it is a tool. It is basically you sprint either on your own or with people, and you battle monsters. It's really great if you're into gaming, and I'm into gaming, so it just really appealed to me. But if you are on For the Words, you can find me on there. My username is Spooky Writer. Feel free to come and add me as a friend, and if I'm on, I will write with you and battle together. I don't mind, it's a lot of fun. But yeah, that's my first tip. Set realistic goals, find ways to stick to them, and break your whole process down. Basically, you got to have a plan for how you're going to write this book, and don't overthink it. That's the other side of it. Don't try and be perfect. Don't try and do things that don't fit with you. I was recently talking to Kelly Armstrong, the author, and she was talking about rules and routines that authors put out into the world and all the things we've heard, and she said they're all good, but if they don't work for you, throw them away. So what I would say to you is, if you don't have writing routines or goals and stuff like that, try other people's, but if it doesn't fit you, there is nothing wrong with you. That system just doesn't fit. I have a friend who has taken on Stephen King's Write 2,000 Words every day. That's working for him. So when you're setting your realistic goals and you don't know how to set them, play first. Don't be afraid to experiment and test and see what works, and throw away anything that doesn't. Writing a book is supposed to be fun. My next tip kind of leads on for that, and it's create yourself a dedicated writing routine. So I hear lots of people will say to me they don't have the time to write, and I will ask them, how many minutes a day are you on your phone? Because we all really do have time to write. Pretty much in every day there will be a snippet of time. When I was first writing my book, I used to write in 10-minute sprints. I used to have my Write or Die. It was a 10-minute timer, and I would sit down, I would write 10 minutes. And so anybody who says to me they don't have the time to write, I'll be like, could you find 10 minutes? 10 minutes in a notebook, 10 minutes on your phone, 10 minutes at your desk. It doesn't have to be long. And I think we get into this idea that if we can't sit down for 3-4 hours at a time, that there's no point in writing. I promise you there absolutely is. When I was writing with that full-time family, young children at home, I wrote around them. I wrote on the weekends. I found time to write, and actually I joke that I wrote more words then than I do now when I actually have less responsibilities, and it's the craziest thing. But when you're creating yourself a deadline, pick a time to write. Could be the evenings, could be getting up first thing. So at the moment I am doing some freelance work, and there's a lot of freelance work to do, so I'm actually getting up really early in the morning and getting that done before I do anything else and before anyone else is in the house. I also make it distraction free, and I've made myself a routine. So it's literally, I'll get up in the morning, I'll get my cup of coffee, I will go downstairs to my desk, log on to For the Words, join a battle with people who I regularly write with, and start writing. And that's at 5 in the morning, and I will write until about 7:30 in the morning, when everyone else in my house starts to get up, and that's when I will go upstairs, get dressed, get ready for the day and do all that stuff, because I can get dressed, I can brush my hair, do my makeup, I can load the dishwasher on the washing machine while everyone's up and around and making a noise. What I can't do so well is write, so I leave all that stuff to later, and that has been working for me. So you have to find where your space and time is to write, because you do need that quiet time, or however you write, you do need that place. And some people will even suggest having a ritual. I believe, and I've read Stephen King's on writing, so this is why I'm quoting it, he will sit with a cup of tea or water with his vitamin pill on his desk and get to his desk between 8 and 8:30 every morning, and then he has the goal of writing 2,000 words in the day. And he says sometimes he'll have that 2,000 words by 11 o'clock, and sometimes by dinner time in the evening he's leaving his desk having not written it. Neil Gaiman is another one whose writing routine, you can find loads of writing routines. He goes down to the shed at the bottom of your garden and he has no electrical things with him because he writes by hand, and I think he does like about 3 hours of writing. But everyone has, if you listen to the professional writers, most of them have a routine that they do and they repeat, and it's so that the writing just becomes a second nature, and then you actually start to crave it. So again, play with routines, play with your schedule, look for bits of time where you can write. I had a friend who literally wrote on the train to work every morning before he became a full-time writer, because that was his free time, and he had a baby at home, but he had an hour's commute to work, so he would earphones in, laptop in front of him, train go, he gets on the train, he writes for an hour, gets off the train, writing his way, but he's done the writing for the day and he had that routine. And eventually you do it so much it just becomes this habit. So the next tip I have for you is about planning your book before you write it. Now, for your first book, I would definitely suggest doing this. However, I am a pantser, so it really depends on how you write, whether you are a discovery writer or a planner, but at least plan some of your story. So I am writing my next DCI Rogan book pretty soon, and I am not a plotter, but I have my plan for that book in place. I know how long I want the story to be. I want it to be about 80,000 words. It's a British crime story, so I know the crime that's going to happen in it. I know who did it. I know who my main character is. I know some of the events that are going to happen through the story to him in his life. And so the planning of my story isn't the same of plotting my story, but I have actually planned what I'm going to write about. If you do use an outline, play with your outline, but allow yourself freedom to change things if, you know, you get to a certain point and realise that something needs to be different in the story. Especially if you're writing your first book. I remember when I did my first outline and when I tried outlining and then I wrote to the outline, and it got to a point where the story felt like it needed to go a different way, but I didn't take it that different way because of my outline. So just remember, when you have an outline, you can change these plans as you go along. One of my other ones, and this is probably one of the biggest, hardest ones, is silence your inner critic and finish your book. So it's kind of two tips in one. Silencing your inner critic. I get it even now when I am over 50 books into my career, that I will sit down and write and the book feels rubbish. That little voice in my head is telling me, what the hell are you doing? You can't write for anything. Your writing is rubbish. You believe I have the most nastiest inner critic in my head telling me, not very nicely, how rubbish my writing is. And the amount of times I'm like, I don't know why I do this. I'm rubbish at it. I should just go and get a real job. So try and silence that. We all have that voice in our head, and I don't think it ever goes away. It's just learning to shut the damn thing up. But the other one is actually finish your book. So when I wrote my very first book, I wrote the first chapter, and sometimes I would get as far as chapter 10, and that it would just, because it's a first draft and I'm a reader, I would actually compare what I was writing to what I was reading, and it was a mistake, and I was always rewriting my chapter and never making it very far. Discovering NaNoWriMo was probably the best thing I ever did, because what they want you to do is to write 50,000 words, and it doesn't matter what it is. And so I literally did. I was using my Write or Die at the time, so I wasn't even correcting typos, and I had the goal of writing 50,000 words. But you know what? I had such a blast with that story because I wasn't caring about anything. I didn't care if it was good. I didn't care if it had typos. I didn't care if it had plot holes. I literally just had the best fun and just wrote this book. I wrote over 50,000 words actually, because story just went over it, but I actually got through the story and finished it, and it was telling myself the story. So this is what I'll say to you, is finish the story. When you're writing, you can be so tempted to jump back to chapter 1, to jump back to chapter 2, back to chapter 3, but the thing is, by the time you finish the story, those chapters might not actually be included in your final draft. When I finished my first book, I took a course on editing, and one of the things she said is take your act 1 and then take chunk. You know how you get a pack of cards and you cut the deck. She said to take your act 1 and cut the deck. And can you start your story from the part that you've cut your deck? And you know what, I could, and it was like 7 chapters. So my first 7 chapters went in the bin, because she was like, if you could start your book from that point that you cut it in act 1, then you don't need all this stuff ahead of it. And it was the best tip that I ever had for writing. So don't edit, don't look back, try your best not to doubt yourself, because all those things will stop you from finishing your book. Don't try to be perfect. The point of writing your book is just to get from start to finish. We don't care, you need to not care how that story is. Tell it for yourself. It was another tip I had off a friend who was telling me that sometimes the first few books you write are called trunk novels. Basically, they sit in a trunk and they never see the light of day. And I have some of those, and they can feel like a waste, but really they're not. They're practice. You think of anything like a musician or a painter, they do not create their masterpiece on the first go. They have sheets of paintings that they've thrown in the bin. They have learned how to play music before they can play, on stage or whatever. Take away this expectation that you need to have it perfect straight away, because that's not going to happen, and all you're going to do is make yourself miserable. And my last tip is about accountability and support. Get yourself some support or an accountability partner. Find a new writer who is in the same boat as you, or even an experienced writer. During COVID, I wrote with a friend. He was writing his first book. I was on book 40 something, and we wrote together, and it didn't matter where we both were in our careers. It was just sitting and sprinting together. The same is with my For the Words that I show up. I don't know if they're writing the first book or their 50th book or whatever. We're just showing up and writing. And that actually leads me into some news, actually, because I have started a podcast with my friend Rob Radcliffe. It is launching on December 27th, but we are talking about helping new writers and indie authors into the career, because we have seen there are a world of amazing podcasts out there, and they are really fantastic, but they're not so much aimed at the newer writers. They have guests on who have achieved amazing things, but I know as a new writer that those things are like way out there, and as a new writer you're all the way down here. So we've started a podcast called the Indie Author Roadmap, and I will link it below, and we're just talking to new writers and people who are new to the indie career, but we will be your accountability partners. We have a Facebook group where you can come in, you can chat to us and chat to the other people in there, and you will find support, because I know that the people in your life don't always understand writing a book, so it can be hard to find the support, and also sometimes you get embarrassed. That's one of my things. If I do something creative that I feel foolish about because I might fail at it, I don't tell people about it, and I know some people are like that with writing their first book. So come and get some accountability and support. But yeah, I am gonna leave this here. I hope this was useful, and I hope if you are wanting to write a book in 2025, come and tell me. Come join my little podcast group, or you can join my own little group. I'll link everything down below. But I want to wish you the best of luck, and I want to wish you a really good new year, and I'm going to link above if you want to watch my stuff on brainstorming and getting your story ideas. I have a whole series talking about it, which will be really useful starting point for where you could start your book. But until then, I will see you next time. Happy writing.